And we're live. Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin, joined on this fine Tuesday afternoon by Jovan Buha of The Athletic, friend of the show. Uh, I would just say like a legitimately, I think Aaron called you the people's reporter. I think that's true. I think with the amount of shows and appearances you do, I think you are the leading candidate for most popular beat reporter out there.
I try. I try to be as accessible as possible, and I really love like interacting with people, and I try to respond to tweets when I can. But yeah, I mean, I will take it. I guess I got that nickname on the playback, all access Lakers streams that I've done over the last few months, and
Mhm.
I'm humbled by it. I appreciate it.
Jovan does incredible work for the Athletic. He's been on top of the Lakers in really cool ways, and on top of the goings on. And we are in the busiest time, I would say, of the NBA season. Minutes, I would say, before we went live, we got news that Adrian Griffin was fired by the Milwaukee Bucks. And now that apparently Doc Rivers is a leading candidate to replace him, there is just something that like NBA owners can't help themselves. If you are on ESPN and you're on their nationally televised games and you just preach platitudes that don't have anything to do, honestly, with what they're watching, if you just say like they need to feel connected more, NBA owners can't help themselves. They are going to hire you. So the only thing that was that getting in the way, like that makes it even the more special that Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson weren't able to get jobs out of it. Doc Rivers sits in that chair for about 6 months, and here we already are. I know a lot of Lakers fans are wondering because Adrian Griffin, the team that he was coaching, has a much better record. Griffin had a much better relationship with Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is that team's best player. I know a lot of Lakers fans are really curious, and I know this isn't necessarily where we were going to go in the show, but sometimes you have to adjust on the fly. Lakers fans are probably wondering, why'd this guy get the can, and why is Darvin Ham somehow safe at 500 in the 9 spot of the conference? Jovan, do you want to speak to that to the extent that you can?
Yeah, I mean it's a fair question, but I think we were just discussing it pre-show. Like, I think that Clippers win was sneakily important. The buzz I had been hearing before the game, rather, was that it was trending toward Darvin kind of being safe no matter what. But
Yeah.
if the team continued to spiral and get 4 or 5 games under 500, go on a 5, 6, 7 game losing streak, like that's where the seat would go from. I had made the analogy of it was like a seat warmer in the car, and
Yeah.
you got the 3 levels there. It was on like level 1. It was getting a little bit warm,
Hmm.
but not in not dire by any means, or he wasn't threatening to be fired at that moment. But you lose to the Clippers, then I mean they had that stretch coming up of Clippers, Thunder, Mavericks, and to
Yeah.
win all 3 of those games, sandwich in there was the blowout loss to the Suns and the loss to the Jazz without LeBron on the road. But I think they didn't right the ship because you still have the Brooklyn loss, and they are 5-3 over their last 8 games with some again double-digit losses in there. But I think overall the way the team has been playing this last week and a half has saved Darvin, and seems like he's going to be safe for the rest of the season. Of course, that could all like my understanding is that could change if things just go haywire, and
Yeah.
again, like it's like they lose 7, 8 in a row, and just the season appears lost. But at that point, like the season's basically over anyway. So firing him, I don't know if that
Yeah.
solves anything necessarily, other than maybe at that point it's just an untenable situation. So I understand. I mean, I get it. Every time I tweet out the starting lineup or just basically anything,
Yeah.
I get the Darvin pushback, and I think a lot of the criticism is deserved.
Yeah.
But with where things are at, he's almost certainly going to be safe throughout the rest of the season, again, barring a catastrophic stretch, which I don't think any of their recent skids kind of reach that level.
What we need is for LeBron to like tweet what in response to Adrian Griffin getting fired. That would
Yeah.
be incredible. But no, I would add to all of that, and I agree with all of it. And like, you know, to those who wonder about this stuff, like as soon as this came out and I tweeted that I didn't see it coming. The reason I didn't see it coming is because like the Adrian Griffin hire was a Giannis hire. They hired the guy because he was like, you know, Giannis's best bud basically on that coaching staff last year. And I thought that would make him safe throughout the season. I think a tidbit or a detail that has gotten kind of overlooked is Terry Stotts stepping away right before the season started. That was kind of their Dame hire, right? That would
Mhm.
be kind of the stand-in in the coaching room and in film rooms and stuff for Dame's voice. And there was the long piece that I believe Shams Charania wrote on that situation there in Milwaukee and how Griffin has kind of struggled with communication this season. And you know, it's been an interesting season there. And you know, as I'm you know, talking right now about the reaction to Adrian Griffin getting fired, I got the meme that's like the pastor like looking down as Jesus, I see what you've done for other people. I want that for me. Like I totally understand the frustrations here with him, and it's not only fan frustration, but there's some player frustration has been kind of a steady
It's been
factor.
very,
And
very apparent. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, and it's and I think the frustrations are well found, and we'll see. I'm with you. I don't think he gets fired this season. He has gotten, you know, even when, you know, I wrote what I wrote, and then you and Shams wrote what you guys wrote for the Athletic, and you had that ripple effect kind of go throughout the organization. You guys had six sources that were willing to come forward and be listed in the piece. And I thought it was a very well written and founded piece on the situation there with
Thank you.
Ham. And when it's that loud, when it's that many people who are coming out and speaking to the situation there, the Lakers have no choice but to listen and take that into account. And I was really kind of curious what the fallout of that was going to be. And then, like a couple days later, Sam Amick, also of The Athletic, writes a piece in which he talks about Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka stepping forward and showing their support for Darvin. After that, you had Chris Haynes on a nationally televised game talking about the same thing, that Jeannie and Rob really stand by their guy. And I started kind of asking around, what's, you know, is there something worth kind of looking into here? And I do kind of get the sense that Jeannie and Rob feel some pressure that this was their hire, you know, following, you know, what went down with Frank Vogel. This is, you know, coach number two. And if this doesn't work out, there's going to be some questions asked because this is more dead money on the Lakers' books if they fire the guy. And I do kind of wonder what kind of impact that has had on the process and how this has gone down. As far as Darvin's job, though, and you mentioned the lineups, and you mentioned and I guess you agreed with the notion of the frustration here with the guys. Um, do you ever get the sense that like he has lost the locker room? Like just outright, do you ever get the sense that this is not fixable with him, and whether it's a pocket of guys, whether it's the entirety of the room, whether it's, you know, a couple important voices, like what kind of sense in being there on a more daily basis do you get from the standing he has with the guys he's trying to lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think he's lost the locker room because I think you'd potentially see a situation like Milwaukee. Like that's a situation where clearly, I mean,
Yeah,
it's about as quick as you can get fired as
it's
a, you know,
crazy.
halfway through your first season as a head coach. Like that's about as bad as it gets. And
Yeah,
with Darvin, you know, I think there's clearly been frustration, and you've seen it. Like I'm not breaking any news here, but you've seen it with the post game comments from several
Absolutely.
players. Like it's pretty unanimous that any player we talk to at some point will bring up the rotations, the lineups, and the general frustration and disappointment
And
with some of
compliment
that
the other
stuff.
coach.
Compliments to opposing coaches, and then you've also had. I mean, our story came out at this point almost 3 weeks ago, and you've not really had any player come out and defend
Yes.
Darvin
That's a great
during
point.
this 3-week period.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, even his comments since then have really been about ownership and the front office supporting him and not necessarily the players. He had the one comment about being on the same page with LeBron and AD and that he runs stuff by them. But aside from that, there hasn't been this like, oh, well, all the players are on the same page with me or this and that. And he's since talked about some conversations that he's had with D'Angelo Russell and how him and Russell don't always see eye to eye. So really, like the team has turned it around to an extent with some of their recent wins and some impressive wins against some pretty good opponents. But really, like if you just look at the public availabilities and what everyone has been saying and the way they respond to certain questions, like you can kind of see like it's not everyone's on the same page. Like that's I think that's kind of putting it at a minimum. But as far as the locker room, like I think that the biggest thing is what we reported as far as guys just want consistency. Guys want like this is the starting group. These are the top 8 or 9. And yes, there's injuries are going to pop up. Like Taurean Prince gets added to the injury report. He's a starter. That's going to change the rotation. But aside from situations like that, I think that the frustration has stemmed from the wholesale changes of sometimes it is a starter's out or a key bench guy's out. And then all of a sudden it is a brand new rotation to kind of compensate for one player being out. And yes, they've had a lot of injuries. There have been, a lot of games where it's been several guys out, several key contributors. I think the Gabe Vincent loss, it's kind of gets swept under the rug now because he's been out basically the whole season. But like that was their primary offseason addition. That was like the main, like he was supposed to be the Dennis replacement. He was supposed to be a backup point guard who was going to close some games depending on how D'Angelo Russell was performing. And to not have that guy, to not have another shooter and a ball handler, like it has affected things. At the same time, LeBron, AD, Austin, and D'Lo have basically been healthy all season. If you look at the Lakers' injuries, they're closer to like that top 10 rather. They're not like leading the league in injuries, so it's not like they've just been totally decimated. And they have had a tough schedule, but the schedule is starting to lighten up. So like you can kind of, I guess, view it in a positive way and in a negative way. But the fact of the matter is, I think the players just want some more consistency. You have seen that the last few games. I think the Taurean injury did throw a wrench in that, and we'll see if he plays tonight. We'll see how that affects things. Of course, LeBron is out, so that's just another situation where you're going to have a new starting lineup, most likely. But I think the guys just want to know, like, hey, I'm playing from the 8-minute mark to the 2-minute mark. Like, I'm going to play in this quarter and this quarter, and like this is the general rotation. And I think the continually changing the identity and changing the rotation and changing the lineups, like for them to not be able to say this is our best 5-man unit 45 games into the season, that's pretty wild. So I think from what I've heard, that's been the biggest point of frustration. I think you look at a guy like D'Lo, he's a perfect example of this. Of D'Lo gets benched for that all wing lineup in late December, and then he's starting to play less off the bench. And right before he returns to the starting lineup, he had a game where he played 16 minutes, which was a season low. And then all of a sudden he's back in the starting lineup. He's putting up 30 points a game and like he's looking really good. But like he's a guy who has had his role and spot in the rotation kind of toyed with. You can make the case for Austin, him coming off the bench early in the season. Rui is probably the worst case of it all. But Vando, like you can just kind of like really the only guys that have had stable roles have been LeBron and AD, which you expect, Taurean, and Cam.
Crazy.
And outside of those four, and one guy's a vet minimum guy, one guy was the biannual exception guy. And outside of those four, the other 6 to 8 spots in the rotation have vacillated throughout the season. And it hasn't all been because of injuries. So I think that's been the kind of the point of contention in recent weeks. It has gotten better. They've been winning. I think the rotation has solidified a little bit more, but I think it's going to have to go another few weeks. And then on top of it, you have the trade deadline looming over all this of potentially 1, 2, 3, 4 guys aren't going to be on the roster. And now you're going to have to start over again with new starting lineup, new rotation. So there's a lot going on right now that has led to some of the frustration and just disagreement that has been going on. But so I would say to kind of circle back, like, I don't think the locker room is lost, but they're definitely not on the same page. And there are fractures within the locker room. And it is something that this team is going to have to address, be it by making some trades or by continuing to win and having more consistency really for the rest of the season, I think, for this to turn around.
Absolutely. Really quick before we move on, shouts to Nick Dasilski saying, "Go Lakers. I've been listening to your podcast for years now. Regards from Madrid." I appreciate that. It's just always crazy. Like Madrid,
That's awesome.
Brazil, Germany, all that stuff. It's just the YouTube and the internet. It's a crazy place. I want to then use that as an opportunity to segue to the trade deadline, which is what we were going to talk about in the first place. Today, the initial news that we were going to bring up and kind of use as a launching point was the Terry Rozier trade. I had reported heading into the trade deadline stuff and trade deadline season that Rozier was a name to keep track of. After that, after I wrote about that, I then heard that the Lakers had reached out to Charlotte about his availability and what that cost would be. He then gets traded for essentially Kyle Lowry's expiring contract. Lowry's probably going to head to the buyout market, and I would imagine the Lakers are going to have some interest there, given Gabe Vincent's lack of availability this season. They'd had previous.
I don't know if they should add a Miami point guard. Let's be
I know. It's kind of terrifying. They're going
to sign Lowry. He's going to get injured immediately.
they gotta if they do sign Lowry, they got to make sure he goes through Charlotte first, so that Pat Riley can't break his kneecaps on his way out those doors. That's the concern. There's these bone bruises that Riley has, just kind of hitting them on their way out. But Rozier, though, is somebody that the Lakers, I believed, were going to have interest in, and then found out that they did eventually make some calls into Charlotte for him, seeing as it was going to cost a first rounder, and the Lakers have only one to work with this year. They wound up sitting out those negotiations to a certain extent because Dejounte Murray is still their kind of top priority this trade deadline season. I do have a question, though, because this trade deadline is moving so much faster than years prior. You had OG traded a couple weeks ago. You had Pascal Siakam traded last week. You have now Terry Rozier traded this week. And I do kind of think that the Lakers, somewhat correctly, are sitting there saying, why is this happening so quickly? Because I think they figured they could come back to Rozier later in the deadline season once they find out, for sure that Murray wasn't going to happen. And then he just gets moved. So, what kind of sense did you get in their interest in Murray in Rozier in the first place? And is everybody sitting there why are we freaking? Why is this moving so quickly? Do you think this will have an impact on how quickly the Lakers move this deadline season?
Potentially. And to go back to something I reported on, and I know you reported on as well, the Dejounte Murray talks got pretty close. Yeah. They were pretty close to getting to the level of approval and figuring out the final framework of that deal
and stuff. Yeah,
all that stuff. But it was getting to that point before the talks fell apart. So had that happened when those talks were happening, I mean, that was about a week and a half ago, looking at the date quickly, that would have been the Lakers making their big move almost a month before the trade deadline. So I think the way that this season has played out, there are a lot of haves and have-nots. I mean, we have some historically bad teams to say not. I mean, clearly Detroit, but even looking at San Antonio, Portland, Charlotte, you're kind of seeing already the play-in mix is basically set in both conferences. And there's a lot of, there's a lot more buyers than sellers right now. So I think when you have the opportunity to pull the trigger on a move, you're going to do it. And even if it's a little bit quicker than, or a little bit sooner in the timeline rather than we're accustomed to, because most of the time it's like 90% of the trades happen, or including the big trades, happen within a few days of the trade deadline at most, but really like that day
Sometimes
before and
minutes
the day
before,
of.
right? You had
Minutes,
like
yeah.
Woj
So
tweeting like, "Oh my, like good lord," right before the deadline or right after the deadline passed, because like 13 moves were all within minutes of the deadline ending.
and already, like, I mean, there's a possibility that depending on how you view OG and Anunoby, the two biggest names at the trade deadline could have already moved, potentially in Pascal
Possibly.
and OG, but possibly. I would say Dejounte is a bigger name, and I think he's going to get traded. But so I would say with Rozier, it's a name that I had heard dating back to last season. I know the Lakers have had interest in him prior. I mean, he was one of the options they were considering with the Russ trade, and you're just kind of talking through different things. But I think he would have made sense. But is D'Lo to Rozier, first off, is that even an upgrade? And second off, is it worth the additional draft capital and assets you would have likely had to have given up? Would Charlotte have even wanted D'Lo and to pair him with LaMelo, or would it have been a similar situation to Atlanta where you now have to reroute him, and then now you have to likely give up additional assets on top of what you're giving up to Charlotte? So, I mean, I think you can make a case like D'Lo to Rozier is a lateral move, if not potentially a downgrade. Like I would say, as far as shooting and passing, I think it's a downgrade. I think you can make a case. Rozier's maybe his floor is a little bit higher than D'Lo, and I think he's a better defender. He's tougher and he's a better defender than D'Lo. But you are risking some stuff with moving D'Lo for Rozier. I don't think it's like this clear cut upgrade that to me a Dejounte would be if I'm the Lakers. But the Rozier trade also kind of sets the market now of an expiring and a first. And if I'm Atlanta, I think that gives me a little bit more leverage in talks with the Lakers and talks with whoever else, just because I'm looking at like Dejounte is a former All-Star. He's on a pretty reasonable deal. Like you're going to be getting him for the next few years. And so I think it's interesting, but things are happening faster than usual. And I think part of it is just teams sensing like we have a shot to, honestly, like maybe even looking at the Lakers and the Heat and kind of what they did last season of like, if we can put the right pieces together, we can go on a run, even if we are a playing team, depending on how the matchups break up. But I mean, looking at New York, like they're a team that feels like they can, depending on the matchups, make the second round at least. Indiana, I think, they viewed it as like, we keep bringing a second star next to Tyrese Halliburton, who's having an all NBA and an all-star season. So I think it's really about teams sensing the moment and being like, what's the point of waiting another month, even if it is the difference between a protected pick or a non-protected pick, or throwing in a second rounder, or whatever asset you're adding in that you maybe wouldn't have to give in a month later. I think teams are just really aggressive right now. And because there's so much competition for these players, because everyone's trying to buy, you're seeing the prices drive up a little bit. So again, that's why I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lakers make a move within the next few days, within the next week. I do think it's likely going to happen closer to the trade deadline, because that's just how these things tend to work. It will drive the prices down slightly because once you're up against that deadline, it's like, we got to figure this out. But I think with the way that this trade season has gone, I wouldn't be surprised if you see another move this week potentially, and then kind of just the domino effect of teams being like, we got to do something before someone else jumps in, because it's also a musical chairs game where, okay, Rozier's off the board, but that takes a team that might have been interested in Rozier. Now it's like they're looking, okay, Dejounte's still there. Who else is on that level? Brogdon, Tyus Jones, it's just you're starting to drop in terms of available difference making. I mean, look, D'Angelo, I guess it would be another name in that mix for opposing teams, but it's interesting how this trade deadline is shaping up. And I do think, though, a big part of it is the parity and teams just sensing like, if we can make a move sooner than later, we can get some momentum, we can figure this out, and we could go on a run in the standings and in the postseason.
What are the chances D'Lo is on the roster past the deadline? This has been one of the weirder seasons with him in that, he signs his deal or he agrees to a deal, and apparently part of those negotiations was foregoing that no trade clause at the time of signing. Like, that is pretty out of the norm in and of itself. He comes into the season, and there was like a 2 or 3 day period between coming to an agreement and actually signing his deal. And I'm told the Lakers at that point were kind of looking around to seeing if they could do some kind of a sign and trade. Didn't like the returns at that time, so they said, okay, cool, we'll go into the season with him. He has had an up and down season, mostly up though. I think he's been mostly fine. He had that one stretch like immediately following the first wave of Zach LaVine rumors where his play really slipped, eventually got benched. But since he's gone back into the starting lineup, he's playing out of his mind, averaging almost 30 points a game, shooting great from the field, all of these things. What are the chances you think the Lakers recommit to him given the asking prices out there?
I think it really depends on how the deadline plays out with what guys are available. I do think that obviously if Dejounte is on the table and he's on the table, that is a player the Lakers would be willing to give D'Lo up for. But I think the asking price for the other guys, I think is a real consideration for them of just like, are we making a lateral move? Are we just shaking things up to shake it up? And again, if you're having to attach assets to any D'Lo trade, which from my understanding, is the situation, then again, is the potential improvement that we're getting from acquiring player X worth the assets that we have to give up? Now, I think the one thing, so I would say my understanding is the odds of them keeping D'Lo are slightly increased just because of how well he's playing. And I think them being more okay with potentially just standing pat, retaining their assets. I know you've been on the potentially saving the first round picks for this offseason, and that is a path that they are considering. Now, the one thing with D'Lo that I think people have to keep in mind is the contract situation.
Yeah,
he does have a player option for next season for $18.7 million. And not to make this a D'Lo versus an Austin thing, but I have seen a lot of people with the way both guys are playing right now kind of point to, well, why don't we trade Austin? And why not keep D'Lo, trade Austin? But given D'Lo's contract situation, aside from whoever you want to say is the better player, the better fit, the third best guy on the team, I would still say all that is Austin. But I understand if you want to make the case for D'Lo, I don't think you can make a case for D'Lo for sure. What you have to remember is that because of the player option situation, if he's opting in, something has kind of gone wrong where he just doesn't have a lot of value around the league. And if he continues to play this way for the rest of the season and the Lakers actualize their potential as a team that could make the second round, make the conference finals, whatever, and D'Lo doesn't have offers and opts in, like that's kind of a troubling sign in and of itself. But on the other side, if he does play like this, more realistically for the rest of the season, he's about to get paid this offseason. And now all of a sudden you are potentially committing to D'Lo at 20, 25 million. I doubt it would go much higher than that. Compared to Austin at potentially half of that.
12.
And regardless of whatever you think of Austin, I don't think D'Lo is worth double the price of Austin. And of course, Austin is cost controlled because of the restricted free agency, because of that situation. But just from an asset management standpoint, you get Austin for at least 2 more years, if not 3, at a reasonable team-friendly cost-controlled price versus D'Lo either opting into his player option because he didn't have a market or opting out. And now all of a sudden you have to pay him a lot of money to retain him. And now that limits some of your flexibility with the rest of your payroll. So just from an asset management, roster building, cap sheet perspective, Austin is the much better value. Again, kind of regardless of whatever gap you think exists between them. So I think that's the thing the Lakers are kind of weighing right now is like, we're in the situation with D'Lo where, again, if he opts in, that means he doesn't have much of a market. Or if he opts out, now we have to pay him or lose him for nothing. And now you potentially just traded Austin and lose D'Lo this upcoming offseason. So it's like, really, the D'Lo contract was signed to be traded. The way it was structured was to have that tradable, movable salary in that mid-size range for the Lakers to make an upgrade at the trade deadline. So again, D'Lo, I think is exceeding his contract right now, obviously with the level he's playing at. But if things keep up, it's really trending more towards him opting out and getting a bag this summer. And if you're the Lakers, maybe you view him as worth that, but it is something that you got to make that call kind of now within the next couple of weeks of what's his market going to look like this offseason. Is he going to opt out? And there's just a lot of factors that go into it beyond just, the win now of this season. That's obviously an important factor, but for them, I don't think there's a big gap between Austin and D'Lo again on either side. And if you can keep the guy who's cheaper, who's younger, who's locked in for more years, you're going to value that. And that's the reason why ultimately, or part of the reason why the Lakers don't want to trade Austin and really have no interest in moving him versus D'Lo. I think they look at it as either way, we're kind of in a tough spot this offseason of either he's on a contract he's not worth, or we have to pay him a lot more. So we probably have to move that guy.
Yeah, it's the thing with Austin and D'Lo is that, like, from a playing standpoint too, Austin can move on the ball when he's playing with LeBron, and they go to those like LeBron Austin sets that are really actually pretty productive in late game situations. And he can move off of the ball, and he can provide you some spot up shooting, and he can do some more of the little things. And I think the Lakers like the fact that at $12 million a year, he can do both of those things. Whereas D'Lo, we saw him really struggle early in the season when they were trying to force Austin onto the ball. D'Lo really kind of struggled, and it made both of those guys, I think, worse version of themselves. And I think that's a factor. And then look, like, I'm told that Jeannie Buss specifically likes the idea of having a homegrown talent as a member of this core here. She really likes Austin, the player, and she really likes Austin, the story. And when you have ownership on your side, that's going to be a big factor. The other thing too, as it pertains to D'Lo and the contract here, is like, you got to think about the relationship D'Lo has with the Lakers. If he continues playing like this, he will have been traded once by the Lakers back in the day when he was shipped off to Brooklyn in a salary dump. He was brought back and helped get the Lakers to the playoffs, and then immediately basically signed a deal that was below what he thought his market was, and was asked to waive that no trade clause. Then his name was on the trade market all season. And so, like, if he plays well here, I don't know. I'm not sure how much goodwill he would have towards the Lakers. If they came out and said, yeah, we totally we're comfortable paying you, cool, then you take the money, you're going to take the money. But, the concern of losing him for nothing, I think, is slightly upticked because D'Angelo Russell hasn't had the best relationship organizationally with this franchise, and that's something that I think they're kind of cognizant of too. And that's something they have to weigh into the risk of. All right, D'Lo's playing really well, and we like this core. We're going to see what comes off from this core. I do think Dejounte Murray is a pretty big upgrade from D'Lo. I know a lot of people, because of the way D'Lo is playing right now, are a little higher than they would be normally. But Dejounte Murray, like, the reason the Lakers are interested in him is because he can play defense. He has shown an ability to play defense at some point in his career. And yeah, it's been he hasn't been playing as good defensively of late, but he's playing with Trae Young. And he's like asked to handle all of the perimeter defense in Atlanta. I think that's a tough spot to put somebody in. And I think the Lakers like that. And then there's a clutch aspect of all of this as well. You mentioned essentially the different paths that the Lakers have in front of them, right? They could swing for the fences with a player like Murray, right? I guess Jeremy Grant fits into this as well. and other players of that ilk. They could kind of hit a single or a double, right, with a Malcolm Brogdon, a Gary Trent Jr., whatever. They can do some combination of the two if they really want to go all in this season. Or they can hold on to that 29 pick and then have potentially upwards of 3 first rounders that they can move it at on draft night of this upcoming season. If you had to handicap this, or if you had to, you know, bet on, or not even bet on, but predict the path ahead of them that you see them heading down, which do you think is the likeliest?
Oof. I would say, I guess a bigger move would be, I'd put that as slightly the favorite. And I guess specifically, I'm going to say Murray, just because from my understanding, they did get very close on a Murray
Yeah.
deal. And those talks are expected to pick back up at some point between now and February 8th. So I think that's the one that, and I know they're trying to find a third team right now to help facilitate the deal. So I would say I'd handicap it as almost, I'm almost going to add a fourth category here of like, I'm going to make Murray his own
Path.
category or path. I would say Murray first, small to mid-size move, big move third, separate big move, and then fourth, the retaining the draft picks for the summer. Just because I think if the way, like, they're in a win now situation, and I don't think that, like, this team has the potential to beat anybody on a given night, and I think they could upset someone in the first round. Looking at already the matchups, like if they're playing OKC in the first round as a 7 or 8 seed, I think the Lakers have a legitimate chance to win that series. But to solely rely on them to figure that out as a bottom tier team with the current group, like this current group clearly has flaws. And I think part of the inconsistency, it does stem from the injuries. It does stem from the rotations and the lineups, but it also stems from the roster construction. And I don't think that gets talked about enough necessarily. But
there
like,
aren't enough two-way
there are a
guys.
lot of, exactly, there are a lot of one-way guys on this team. And that's why you see, I thought D'Lo had that quote about a week ago about when it's our, when our offense is playing well, it's our defense. When our defense is playing well, it's our offense. And that's kind of because you have to play certain guys to be good on one side of the ball. And that comes with the drawbacks of, if you're playing Vando and Cam more, well, now you don't have gravity. You don't have 3-point shooting. Your offense is going to have a certain ceiling on it. And if you're going with Rui, and I thought you saw some of that even in the Portland game of, like, yes, that group, that 5-man unit is really, really good offensively. You don't have a weakness offensively necessarily outside of maybe shooting with that front court. But defensively, you have some limitations of, athletic, quicker perimeter guys can get downhill against you, can create some space against you on the perimeter. So I think for them, they've been kind of playing whack-a-mole at various points this season of, okay, right now, the Vando Cam lineup isn't working because no one has to guard those guys. Okay, well, let's go back to Austin. And then now let's go back to D'Lo and Austin. And like, there's been some wild fluctuations in part because of the limitations of the roster. And so I just don't see them standing pat and not making at least some sort of small move and upgrade. Now, again, that might mean, like, you can thread the needle, I guess, and do a smaller move where you don't give up a first round pick. Maybe you give up a pick swap. Maybe you give up a couple seconds. Maybe you give up you add in a Max Christie or Jalen Hood-Schifino as the sweetener, and that lets you retain that first round pick. So I think there is a way to kind of thread the needle. So maybe I'd pick that over just doing a smaller deal by itself. But I think for them, they're gonna most likely do something. I think they realize that at a minimum, this rotation needs a bit of a shakeup. They need more two-way talent, and whether it's just adding a backup point guard, adding another wing, what have you, I think they are going to do something. So I would put them standing completely pat and not doing anything and retaining all their assets as the least likely right now.
Yeah, even on that front of like the holding on to your pick and seeing what you could do in the draft. One, you have to get LeBron's okay on that. because he could be a free agent. And if he has to sit through another essentially, pseudo lost season where he knows he's going into the playoffs with a roster that he is like not just an underdog, but a heavy underdog in some of those matchups, that is going to annoy him quite a bit. He's going to start looking around like, what am I doing here? Because he has more than held up his end of the bargain. He's playing all NBA basketball at 39 years old. He's going to say like, what the hell, And AD isn't that kind of person to ask those questions, but he's playing like somebody who should be in MVP candidate talks if the Lakers had won more games. And the Lakers haven't won more games because of, like you're talking about, some of that roster construction stuff and some head coaching injuries stuff as well. But I think both of those guys are going to be like, wait, we're going to wait again? And I wouldn't blame them for feeling that way. So I think if they do head down that path, that's something that they have to get okayed on. And then the other thing too is, like, yeah, Pascal Siakam went for essentially 3 first rounders, but they're Indiana's like first rounders. They aren't that valuable. The post LeBron, post Anthony Davis potential first rounders that the Lakers hold on to, I would argue are the high, like the most highly coveted draft capital that can be attained. I would essentially say in the league. So like you could say the picks from Detroit or from San Antonio would be higher coveted, but like you can't get those. There's no reason those teams would trade those picks. But in terms of
are you sure Detroit's not going to trade one for another big man?
they're gonna trade one for Adrian Griffin. They like missed all of today's news, and they're gonna be like, "What? Can we go get that guy?" But they like essentially, a lot of teams around the league are looking at the Lakers after LeBron and basically betting against an unproven front office, right? An unproven leadership ring. And if the Lakers were to move 29 this year, they would still have highly coveted pieces to be able to really add to the roster after the season too. So I don't necessarily see those options as mutually exclusive. I think you could go out and you can add to the roster with 29 and also importantly have like some actual continuity. You'll have somebody going into next season in Dejounte Murray that the organization doesn't know that it has to trade or is going to trade, as it did with Russell Westbrook, as it does with D'Angelo Russell. If you do trade some second round draft capital for some longer term contracts, you do have more pieces together that at least theoretically can go into next season thinking, all right, we can build on this one. That's already gone out the window for this year for the variety of reasons that we've already outlined. But I do think like this whole, and look, it's fun for me to cover. It's fun for us to cover because we're always, a part of these conversations. But in terms of like actually building a healthy organization moving forward, you can't keep either like completely reshuffling your deck or holding on to assets just to later reshuffle your deck. At some point, you have to commit to some version, some identity with LeBron and AD. And that was what was so frustrating about the in-season tournament. I thought that they had arrived at it. It looked like they had figured out how to play with those guys. And then they moved away from it. And now we find ourselves here again talking about moving rotation players for other rotation players who can be maybe moved again eventually later. What sense do you ever get from like an organizational stability standpoint? Is there any, are there people in the organization who kind of look around like, hey, can we start like nailing down some stuff? Can we like, is there any way that we could hold on to something and actually build here moving forward?
Certainly. And I think that was part of the offseason plan with the continuity. They were returning the top 5 scorers from the postseason run, another key guy in Vando. So you're returning, starter in Vando. You're returning 6 of your top 7 guys from that playoff run, with Dennis being the exception. And then you go out and like on paper, I think this roster like should have been better than last season's roster post deadline of, clearly now I would say Dennis to Gabe was a downgrade. Even factoring it, of course the injuries, but like, even factoring in play, like I would just say from what the limited minutes we've seen from Gabe, I think
I would
Dennis
agree.
was just a better player and better fit. But I mean, in theory, bringing back 6 year top 7, maybe doing a lateral move at the time, we kind of viewed Dennis to Gabe as a lateral move, and then bringing in Christian Wood as your backup center to be better than the what they had. I mean, basically, we're playing Rui at the backup 5 or Tristan Thompson uh, at that point, and then bringing in a Taurean Prince, who to me has been an upgrade over Troy Brown Jr., Malik Beasley. Not this year's Malik Beasley, but like the way those guys were playing last year at that, by the playoff time, like Taurean Prince has been better than that. For all the flack Taurean gets, I get it, but like, he's been better than Troy Brown was. So I think on paper, like, you had a better roster, and a big selling point was the continuity. But then you had Vando go out like Vando going out in training camp, I think was kind of where a lot of these problems started. Had Vando not gone out, I think he would have started the season as the starting small forward. You would have had Taurean coming off the bench, and I think there would have been proper slotting to start the season. And maybe Vando starting would have created certain offensive issues that the Lakers would have had to go to Taurean or to Rui and mix things up that way. But I think Vando's injury sneakily had a domino effect that set a lot of these issues in motion, because that promoted Taurean into the starting lineup. That kind of limited Rui's role. And because Rui didn't have a great training camp, I think you kind of saw like Rui had a pretty small role to start the season, and it has fluctuated throughout. But like, I don't think Rui had a great camp, a great preseason, and that kind of put him behind the 8 ball to start the year. So I think the Lakers have tried to prioritize continuity, and with the exception of D'Lo, who again, that contract was basically signed to be moved. It was like, we're going to keep Rui, we're going to keep Vando, we're going to keep Austin. Like, we're going to put these guys next to LeBron and AD. We're going to have Gabe. We're going to bring in someone at the trade deadline. And like, this is a 7 or 8 player rotation that we can grow with. And now it's like, I don't know. Like, I mean, we'll see what happens with D'Lo. Like, Rui is potentially going to be moved now. His season has not gone as expected. Gabe has been maybe the worst mid-level signing, probably the worst mid-level signing, I guess, off the top of my head, given the injuries. And the continuity has just been non-existent. And they don't know their top 5 guys. They don't know their top 8 or 9. So it's kind of been a disaster from that perspective. But I do think they had the intentions to finally establish some continuity. Like, from the second half of last season to this season, you can make the case it is the most continuity roster-wise that they have had since the championship season, or maybe since that second season. So I think there was the intentions, like, we're there to do that. But I think that there's just been kind of one thing after another that has unraveled the continuity. And now you're in a point where, if you do shake up the roster, like, I don't know how much it matters from a continuity perspective, because you just haven't really had it. So it's like, why not bring in new guys? You're basically going to be in the same position.
Yeah, I love the image of like everybody organizationally being on the same page, excited about sustainability and continuity and all those things, and Darvin be like, "Oh, that's the email I missed. My bad. Hold on, we'll go back to it." All right, we'll get you out of here on that note, and again, make sure you guys are following Jovan and all of his work. Whether it's at The Athletic or on his Twitter and all of the other socials that he puts stuff together on. And Jovan, you do great work. I always appreciate you stopping by. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I do have to really quickly answer this one. Have the Lakers taken notice of AD's playmaking? Yeah, they have. And I do think it will be a factor in some of what the Lakers do here. Because I think at one point they were looking at like bringing in a couple point guards, but I do think, like all of the mention of Bruce Brown, for example, he's not a primary ball handler, but he's a secondary ball handler who I think fits with what AD has been doing on the ball. But yeah, Jovan, thank you very much for hopping on. This has been an absolute blast, as it always is. Check out his stuff at The Athletic and on social media, wherever you find him. And we'll talk to you again soon.
I have one thing to say quickly.
Okay, yeah.
I want to give you your flowers. You've been crushing it for the last few weeks, months with the news breaking, with the insider information. And you deserve all the success that you're having right now. And I know the people appreciate it, but I just wanted to give you a much deserved shout out and just tell you you've been doing some great work and to keep it up.
Well, the Venmo's on the way, so I appreciate. No, I really, really do. It's been a fun season, and I'm excited about where everything is heading here moving forward. But again, that's Jovan Buha of The Athletic, and we will be back after the game tonight here on the lounge, in the lounge after the game, after the Lakers probably get their butts kicked by the Clippers. We'll see how that goes. Good luck tonight.